Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going back, way back, to 1787.
A pivotal moment.
Absolutely. The Constitution's just been proposed, and everything's on the line, really. Not just for America, but, for the whole idea of republics working.
Yeah, the stakes were incredibly high. I mean, the Federalists, writing as Publius, they basically said in the first paper, this decision, it's for all mankind.
Wow.
Seriously. A wrong election, they called it, could be a general misfortune. They really felt the weight of history, like they were setting a precedent for the world.
And this wasn't some quiet, scholarly debate either, was it?
Oh, not at all. Publius warns right away about the atmosphere. He talks about a torrent of angry and malignant passions swirling around.
So basically political warfare.
Pretty much. It was intense, driven by this deep, deep fear of power.
Right, because you had the Federalists pushing for a stronger government.
And their opponents immediately tagged them, they're despots in disguise, they hate liberty. That was the accusation.
While the critics, the Anti-Federalists, were accused by the other side of hiding their own ambitions behind, fake concern for the people's rights.
Exactly. A specious mask, Publius called it. So it was charged. Very charged.
Okay, so what's our goal here today? What are we digging into?
We're diving into the Federalist Papers, specifically looking for their core promise.
Which was?
That this new Constitution wasn't about creating one big, all-powerful government, what they called consolidation. No, it was something new.
A compound republic?
That's the term Madison used. A unique structure designed to strengthen the Union, yes, but also to preserve the power and sovereignty of the individual states.
So our mission is to pull out those key arguments, the bits that show how they promised power would be, carefully divided.
Divided, defined, and restrained. Locked into separate spheres. That was the idea. Create this system of dual sovereignty, two levels of government checking each other, all to protect liberty.
Okay. And we have to start with that basic fear, right? The anti-federalist nightmare that a strong federal government meant the states just disappear.
Absolutely. The Federalists had a two-part job. First, prove the current system, the Articles of Confederation, was completely broken, terminally ill.
Leading to anarchy, basically.
Yes. And second, they had to make this really counterintuitive argument that the vigor of government is essential to the security of liberty.
That strong government and freedom aren't enemies, but actually depend on each other.
Exactly. That was the core contradiction they had to resolve right out of the gate. So convincing people who just fought a revolution against a king to accept a stronger central government, that's a tough sell.
Yeah, you'd think so.
So step one for the Federalists was showing just how bad things were under the Articles of Confederation. And Publius 15 doesn't pull any punches. It basically says America's on the brink of impending anarchy.
And the root cause was this structural thing, that the Articles set up a government of governments, not a government of people.
Precisely. Publius called it a solecism of theory, like a fundamental error in logic.
Okay, what does that mean in practice? A sovereignty over sovereigns, a government over governments.
Think about it. Congress, under the Articles, needed money, right? Or soldiers. They couldn't just tax people or draft them.
They had to ask the state governments.
Exactly. They could only request things from the sovereign states like Massachusetts or Virginia. They had zero power to compel individual citizens directly.
And if a state just said no, or dragged its feet,
then Congress's resolutions became, just advice or recommendation, as Publius put it. They had no teeth.
Okay, so that leads to the big problem they identified.
Yeah.
How do you enforce anything?
Right, the coercion problem. This is central, laid out in Publius 15. If a government can only deal with other governments, other sovereign bodies, what happens when one refuses to comply?
Uh-oh.
You really only have two options. One is how normal governments work. They use courts, law enforcement, what Publius called the coercion of the magistracy against individuals who break the law.
Okay, standard procedure.
But if your laws are directed at states and a state refuses, your only tool is force, military force. The coercion of the sword.
So they were saying the Articles basically guaranteed civil war if Congress ever tried to enforce its own decisions.
That's exactly the argument. It built conflict into the system. Every breach of the laws must involve a state of war, Publius wrote. The only way to make a state obey was to attack it.
Which is insane. That's either a military rule or the whole thing falls apart.
Right. As Publius said, no sane person would choose to commit his happiness to it. It was a system designed to fail. because its only enforcement mechanism was internal war.
Wow. Okay, so beyond that structural nightmare, they also warned about what happens if the union just dissolves, right? If the states go their separate ways.
Yeah, big time. They painted a pretty grim picture of both external and internal threats.
Let's start with the outside threats, foreign powers.
Absolutely. Publius IV and others argued that if America split into, say, 3 or 4 smaller confederacies, north, middle, south, they'd be instant targets.
Easy pickings for Europe.
For sure. Foreign nations would love it. They'd use the old strategy, divide et impera, divide and rule.
Play one small American republic against another.
Keep them weak, squabbling. Make sure America never becomes a serious commercial or military competitor. That was the fear.
And the flip side was that a united America presents a much stronger front.
A more forbidding posture, as Publius 41 puts it. They argued unity was the best defense. A large, united country with its resources and population could potentially secure itself without a single soldier, just by being too big and too unified to mess with easily.
That contrasts sharply with the alternative they painted.
Oh, yeah. Disunion, they warned, would force America to become like Europe.
Meaning?
Constant rivalry between neighboring states, which means big standing armies, constant preparation for war, and perpetual taxes to pay for it all.
Scenario where liberty gets crushed between standing armies and perpetual taxes. That's a powerful image.
It really is. They basically said, stick together, or you'll end up with massive debts, huge militaries, and less freedom, just like the old world you escaped. Disunion was expensive in blood and treasure.
And that internal conflict wasn't just military, right? They were really worried about trade wars.
Huge concern. Publius 7 dives deep into this. Commercial rivalry, they predicted, would be a fruitful source of contention, maybe even more dangerous than foreign enemies.
Because if each state or region makes its own trade rule...
Instant conflict, tariffs between New York and New Jersey, Virginia blocking Maryland ships, landlocked states feeling choked off by coastal states with ports.
Resentment builds up fast.
Exactly. States would start seeing normal economic competition as deliberate injuries. And according to Publius, it escalates quickly from there.
Why so fast?
Because human nature, they argued, doesn't change. People, and by extension the states they run, are ambitious, vindictive, and rapacious. And economic slight leads to retaliation, which leads to outrages and wars.
And they had examples, right? They weren't just guessing.
No, they pointed straight to history. Ancient Greece, the Peloponnesian War, fueled by rivalries. The German states at the time, a mess, easily manipulated. The lesson was clear. Put independent neighbors next to each other, and eventually they fight. It's almost inevitable.
So the bottom line, the Articles of Confederation were failing, replicating these historical disasters. The new Constitution had to fix the enforcement problem, give the government real power over individuals, and fix the disunion problem by uniting the states under one roof for trade and defense.
That was the diagnosis. Without those fixes, liberty was doomed anyway, crushed either by internal conflict or external weakness. Okay, so if the problem was a government that couldn't govern individuals, leading to chaos, the fix couldn't just be, total centralization. That was everyone's biggest fear.
Right, trading anarchy for tyranny, not a great deal.
Exactly. Which brings us to James Madison's really brilliant concept, the compound republic. He lays this out masterfully in Federalist No. 39.
That's the famous one where he says the Constitution isn't strictly national nor strictly federal, but a mix, a composition of both.
Precisely. Understanding that hybrid nature is absolutely key to understanding the whole American system they were proposing. It's not one or the other. It's deliberately both.
Okay, let's break that down. How did they see it being composed?
We can look at it in 3 ways. Where its power comes from the foundation, how it operates, and crucially, how far its powers actually reach the extent.
All right, let's start with the foundation. Where's the federal part there? How did it remain federal at its roots?
The power, the legitimacy of the Constitution didn't come from a single national vote of all Americans lumped together.
Ah, right. It had to be ratified by each state individually.
Exactly. Ratified by the people, yes, acting within their separate states as distinct political communities. Each state was a co-equal partner in forming the Union. That ratification process itself was purely federal.
And the structure of the Senate reflects that too, right? 2 senators per state, no matter the size.
Perfect example. It shows the states entering the Union as equal entities, preserving that federal character in the very foundation and structure of the legislature.
Okay, so that's the federal foundation. But the point was to fix the Article's weakness. So where does the national character come in? The part that gives it teeth?
That comes in through its operation, how it actually works day to day. This is the ingenious part that solved the old coercion problem.
Because it can act directly on people.
Yes. Unlike the Articles, this new federal government wouldn't just send requests to state legislatures. It could pass a law, say a tax law, and enforce it directly on John Smith in Virginia or Sarah Jones in Massachusetts.
Bypassing the state government level for certain things.
For its specific defined responsibilities, yes, it operates on individuals. And that, as Publius argued, swaps the terrible coercion of the sword military force against states for the much milder, more normal coercion of the magistracy, using courts and law enforcement against individuals who violate federal law.
Okay, that makes sense. Acting on people, not states, is the big change. But that sounds like it could swallow the states. If the federal government can tax and police individuals directly, what stops it from taking over everything? That was the anti-federalist fear, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And the answer lies in the third aspect, the extent of its powers. This is where the idea of dual sovereignty of defined spheres really comes in.
So it can act like a national government, but only within very specific boundaries.
Exactly. Publius 39 and especially 45 drive this home. They promise two distinct levels of government, federal and state, each supreme within its own area. And crucially, the federal government's area was meant to be strictly limited.
And Madison gives that famous description of the limits in Federalist 45, right?
The absolute classic formulation. The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined.
Few and defined. That's key.
Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite.
Okay, unpack that. Federal powers are specific, listed things.
Things like national defense, foreign treaties, regulating commerce between the states and with foreign nations, coining money. Big picture items essential for the whole union to function as one entity externally and peacefully internally.
And the states keep everything else.
Basically, yes. Numerous and indefinite means the vast bulk of governing stays with the states. All the day-to-day stuff, regulating property, contracts, crime within the state, education, roads, family law, all the more domestic and personal interests of the people, as Madison put it, things that touched citizens' lives directly and constantly. That's state territory.
So the idea was the federal government handles the external and interstate framework, but the states handle the substance of daily life and governance.
That was the promise, a clear division of labor. This directly countered the fear of consolidation by building a wall around state authority. The federal government simply couldn't meddle in purely local matters because those powers weren't on its short, defined list.
It creates these two spheres. But then Madison does something really clever with the size of the country, right? Turns a perceived weakness into a strength.
He does. This is Federalist 10 and 51 territory. The old thinking, from guys like Montesquieu, was that republics had to be small, homogeneous, otherwise they'd fall apart or become tyrannical.
Because it's easier for everyone to agree in a small place.
Sort of. But Madison flipped it. He argued that a large republic, encompassing a huge territory and many diverse interests, different economies, religions, regions, actually protects liberty better.
How?
Because it makes it much harder for any single group, any faction, to form a majority and oppress everyone else.
Too many competing interests.
Exactly. In a large republic, you have so many different groups that finding a common motive for a majority to, say, infringe on property rights or religious freedom becomes very improbable, if not impracticable. It provides, as he said in 51, greater security afforded by a greater variety of parties. Factions check each other.
So diversity becomes a shield for liberty in a large republic.
That was the argument. And this principle of dividing power to protect liberty extends to the structure itself.
Which leads to the double security idea.
Right. Federalist 51 lays it out beautifully. First, the power given up by the people is divided vertically between two distinct governments, state and federal.
Okay, the compound republic structure.
Then the power given to each of those governments is divided horizontally among distinct and separate departments, legislative, executive, judicial.
Separation of powers within each level?
Yes. So you have checks and balances running up, down, and sideways. It's a multi-layered defense against power accumulating anywhere. Ambition is made to counteract ambition, both between the states and D.C., and within D.C. itself.
Okay, this idea of two distinct spheres, state and federal, both getting power from the people, both limited, it sounds good in theory, but the Anti-Federalists weren't buying it completely, right? They zeroed in on some specific clauses.
Oh, absolutely. They saw potential loopholes, things that sounded like they could let the federal government break out of its few and defined box.
Like the necessary and proper clause.
That was one. It gives Congress power to make laws necessary and proper for carrying out its listed powers. Critics screamed, aha, that means they can do anything.
And the Federalist response
Was basically, no, read it carefully. It only applies to laws needed to execute the enumerated powers. If a power isn't on the list, say, regulating local schools, then no law about it can be necessary and proper for carrying out federal duties. Because regulating schools isn't a federal duty, it reinforces the idea of enumerated powers. It doesn't erase it.
Okay, but the really big one, the one people still argue about constantly, is the supremacy clause.
Article 6. It says the Constitution and federal laws which shall be made in pursuance thereof are the supreme law of the land.
And the critic said, see, federal law trumps state law, end of story, states lose.
It sounds that way if you don't focus on the key phrase, in pursuance thereof.
Meaning pursuant to the Constitution itself.
Exactly. Alexander Hamilton tackles this directly in Federalist No. 33. He says, look, federal laws are supreme only when they are actually authorized by the Constitution.
So, if Congress passes a law that goes beyond its listed enumerated powers,
then that law was not made in pursuance thereof. Hamilton is crystal clear on this. He says such acts will not become the supreme law of the land.
what are they then?
These will be mere acts of usurpation and will deserve to be treated as such.
Usurpations, not valid laws.
Correct. They are legally void from the start because Congress acted outside its authority. Think of it this way. The Constitution is supreme over both federal and state governments. The Supremacy Clause doesn't make the federal government supreme. It makes the Constitution supreme.
So a federal law is only supreme if it's consistent with the supreme law, which is a constitution that limits federal power.
You got it. It's bounded supremacy. If the federal government steps outside its designated sphere, its actions have no legal force. That pursuant to is the enforcement mechanism for enumerated powers.
That's a crucial clarification. It prevents the Supremacy Clause from being a blank check.
It's supposed to. It hinges on recognizing that federal authority isn't general. It's specific and delegated.
Okay, so we have enumerated powers for the feds, reserved powers for the states, and the Supremacy Clause only applies to valid federal law. But what about areas where both can act, like taxation? Weren't people worried the feds would just tax everything and leave the states broke?
That was definitely a concern. Hamilton and Madison addressed this too, mainly in Federalist 45 and 46. They argued that even where powers overlap, the states have a built-in political advantage.
How so?
Because of human nature, basically. People tend to care more about what's close to home.
Their local government, their state government?
Right. State governments handle the more domestic and personal interests of the people. Property, crime, roads, schools, stuff you deal with every day. Citizens are more familiarly and minutely conversant with state and local affairs.
Whereas the federal government deals with war, foreign policy, currency, more distant, abstract things.
Generally, yes. So, Publius argued people's natural loyalty, their bias, would lean towards their state governments. Unless the federal government provided manifest and irresistible proofs of a better administration. Barring that, people stick with the local.
And this local loyalty acts as a check.
A powerful one. State leaders are right there dealing with local issues. They act as sentinels, watching the national government. If the feds overstep, the state officials can easily sound the alarm, mobilize public opinion through local networks.
Hamilton was so sure of this local bias, he actually thought the bigger danger was states encroaching on federal power, not the other way around.
He did. He saw federal systems as inherently fragile, prone to breaking apart because loyalty defaults to the local level. He figured any federal attempt to usurp state powers would be met immediately by massive popular resistance led by the state governments themselves.
Using the state militias if necessary.
Yeah, he mentions the militias, the local knowledge, the popular confidence. The states, united by a common cause against federal overreach, would form an insurmountable barrier. This built-in competition, fueled by popular vigilance rooted in local attachment, was supposed to keep the federal government in its lane. So we've got this intricate design, this compound republic with power divided vertically between states and the federal government and horizontally within each level.
Checks and balances everywhere.
Right. But the Federalists, particularly Hamilton in Federalist 28, argued this wasn't meant to be a static, polite arrangement. It was designed for competition, even rivalry.
Rivalry between governments sounds kind of dangerous.
It does. But they saw it as healthy. Necessary even. Federalist 28 puts it bluntly, power being almost always the rival of power.
Okay, basic political science.
The general government will at all times stand ready to check the usurpations of the state governments, and these will have the same disposition towards the general government.
So they expected them to constantly be pushing back against each other, like built-in watchdogs.
Exactly. It's structural conflict by design. They knew power wants to expand. So they set up competing power centers, state and federal, each naturally jealous of its own turf, each motivated to resist encroachment by the other. Ambition, counteracting ambition, again.
And who decides who's right when they clash?
That's the crucial part. This rivalry isn't just between politicians in different capitals. It ultimately relied on the people.
The people are the referees.
The ultimate arbiters of balance, as Publius puts it somewhere. I think maybe 46 or 28 implies it. If one level of government, state, or federal goes too far, tries to grab power, it wasn't given.
The other side sounds the alarm.
And the people, theoretically, throw their weight into either scale to restore the proper balance. If the feds overreach, the states alert the citizens, and the citizens, leaning towards their local loyalties, push back against the federal government.
So the system depends on the people being engaged and actually caring about this balance.
Absolutely. Which brings us to the sort of the maintenance requirement. This whole structure isn't a perpetual motion machine. It needs upkeep. It requires fidelity.
Fidelity to the Constitution.
Yes. And specifically, fidelity to those boundaries between state and federal power. Think about the oath of office everyone takes to support and defend the Constitution.
President, Congress, judges, state officials, too.
What does that oath mean in this context? The Federalists would argue it's fundamentally an oath to maintain the balance, to stay within your assigned sphere. For a federal official to consciously push beyond those few and defined powers.
Even if they think it's for a good reason.
Even then. Arguing that times have changed so the limits don't apply anymore. From the perspective of the design, that's not adapting, that's dereliction. It's abandoning your constitutional duty to uphold the structure.
That's a strong word, dereliction.
It reflects how seriously they took these boundaries, which leads to Madison's final, maybe most important point in Federalist 51.
The part about virtue.
Yes. After laying out all these ingenious checks and balances, he basically says, look, this whole system, it presupposes a certain degree of virtue in people.
Meaning what? Honesty, good intentions.
More than that. It presupposes that the people will remain vigilant, watchful over their governments, and that the states will remain, quote, jealous of their rights, that they'll actively fight back against federal encroachment.
So if the people become apathetic about the federal-state divide, or if the states just roll over when the federal government expands,
then the whole machine breaks down, the gears stop meshing, the competition that was supposed to protect liberty evaporates. The written Constitution might still exist, but the functional system it described is gone.
Because the boundaries aren't self-enforcing. They need active defense.
Exactly. Power naturally centralizes if it's not actively resisted. The states were designed to be co-equal guardians of liberty alongside the federal government, but they have to act like guardians. The people have to demand that they act like guardians. If that rivalry dies, the balance is lost.
Okay, so wrapping up our deep dive here, what's the main takeaway from digging into the Federalist Papers on this specific point?
I think it's that the system they sold to the American people wasn't about creating an all-powerful national government. Not at all. It was this incredibly sophisticated design for a compound republic.
A system of divided power.
Divided, defined, limited, and importantly, competitive. The federal government got specific powers, mainly for unity and defense. The states kept the rest, remaining the main governments for people's daily lives.
And this division, plus the internal checks and balances, created that double security for liberty.
Right. Power checking power, vertically and horizontally. And that crucial point about federal supremacy being bounded, only valid when acting pursuant to the Constitution, acts outside that. Usurpations, legally void.
They also put a lot of faith in the idea that people would naturally feel closer to their state governments, right? That local attachment was a key part of the balance.
Yeah, Publius 46 relies heavily on that. The assumption was people's loyalties are local first. That bias would naturally check federal ambition.
And Madison even added that little observation, if people ever did become more attached to the federal government.
It could only be because the federal government provided manifest and irresistible proofs of a better administration compared to the states.
Which leaves us with a pretty pointed question for today, doesn't it?
It really does. Think about it. Today, many people arguably do look more to D.C. than to their state capital for solutions, for leadership, maybe even for identity. Federal power has clearly grown far beyond what seems few and defined.
So is that growth, that imbalance we see now, is it because the original constitutional design was flawed, destined to fail?
Was it because, following Madison's own logic, the federal government has, over time, simply done a better job in the eyes of the people? Have the states failed so significantly in their administration that people's affections naturally shifted?
That's uncomfortable to think about. Is it a failure of constitutional structure or a failure of comparative governance and maybe our own vigilance?
It's the lingering question. The Federalist system, as designed, works if it's enforced as written. And that enforcement requires the states to be jealous and the people to be watchful.
If the states aren't effectively governing and earning that local loyalty, the balance tilts no matter what the Constitution says on paper.
Precisely. So the challenge maybe isn't just about the federal government. It's about whether the states and the people within them are actively maintaining their side of that constitutional bargain, that rivalry that was supposed to secure liberty. Are we still demanding that balance?
Well, that's about all the time we have. You've been listening to The Deep Dive from Wake Up and Smell the Freedom, where ideas percolate. Thanks for joining us as we continue to explore the ideas that shape liberty and continue to shape us today. Remember, the pursuit of liberty begins with understanding, and understanding begins with asking the right questions. Until next time.
Bye-bye.